Okay, everybody, I think I'm ready to start this meeting. Can everybody hear me? Sally Thomas just came in. Welcome. Welcome to the Sunday seminar called I'm sorry. Welcome to our Sunday seminar. It's Sunday, August 16th, 3 p.m. and I'm glad you're all here. And the first thing we're going to do is take care of some housekeeping chores. I would like everyone to remain muted unless you're actually speaking or need to speak. And know that this meeting is being recorded. And there's a chat box available to you that you can type questions into. And also at the bottom of your chat box, once you open the chat box, there's a system for you to be able to actually download and keep a file of what was in that chat box. And so there's, oh, Maggie, can you send something to Lisa Hillgartner or Jerry? Thank you. Send the link. Anyway, there's a way to record your chat, the contents of the chat box, if you choose to do so. I've also placed some links in the chat box for your review that you may want to take a look at. Our league has a Justice Reform Committee, and it was started and it's managed by a longtime Justice Reform advocate, Kit Murphy McNally. And she's created this event for us today. But in order to assure uninterrupted Wi-Fi, she's asked me to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Neil Goodloe, Jr. We're privileged to have Neil Goodloe join us today. He's a criminal justice planner with the Thomas Jefferson area. Excuse me 1 minute, please. Talk quietly, please. He's a criminal justice planner with the Thomas Jefferson Area Community Criminal Justice Board, representing 9 jurisdictions in Central Virginia. Since 2015, he has served on the Evidence-Based Decision-Making Policy Team and also as a member of the Citizen Advisory Board. Mr. Goodloe is responsible for researching evidence-based criminal justice practices and making recommendations for policy and program changes. He works to integrate various data systems into a coherent data grant-funded programming fidelity. And I've also heard he's a pretty good musician too. So Mr. Goodloe, are you?
Thank you. I'm a better criminal justice planner than I am a musician.
Oh, okay.
I want to thank Kit for inviting me to speak. I realized after the invitation that I was going to have to refine some of the research that I had done to specifically address gender responsive issues. So some of what you're going to be seeing today has not been seen by any of my colleagues. Some of it is as fresh as this morning. So without further ado, if I could share my screen with you. Can all of you see this?
Yes.
Excellent. So just a little bit of background. I spent 25 years in adult probation and parole supervision. I retired from the Commonwealth of Virginia at the tender age of 50 as the chief probation officer for 4 counties in Central Virginia and the city of Charlottesville. I then went into the private sector for a while and worked for a criminal consulting firm, and then got on probably one airplane too many And it was about that time that the position that I have now became open. And so I decided to take everything that I've learned both as a practitioner and as a consultant and reapply it back here in Central Virginia. One of my primary duties is to act as staff to the Jefferson Area Community Criminal Justice Board, which is made up of appointed representatives from each of the Board of Supervisors for the counties of Albemarle, Nelson, Greene, Madison, Orange, Louisa, Fluvanna, and Goochland County, and by City Council, Charlottesville City Council. So my position has a little piece of funding that comes from all of those jurisdictions, and I try to help each of those jurisdictions, both independently and collectively, to make better criminal justice decisions and better decisions on how to invest in alternatives to incarceration. As such, I have developed a very close association with both of the superintendents at the regional jails, both the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Jail and the Central Virginia Regional Jail, which is in Orange. And both of those superintendents have handed over 10 years worth of booking data, which allows me this very deep set of data to be able to draw inferences about the system from. So having been through the last 5 years, kind of developing that toolbox, in January, the CCJB directed me to create the first annual report for the Central Virginia criminal justice area. And in the process of doing that, I've drawn on a number of different data sources, some of which are open source data and some of which are specific to the 2 regional jails. And both superintendents have been amazing in allowing me to have access to their data. So what you're going to see today is kind of a combination of all that. I also want to dispel a few myths. If you are a standard consumer of your garden variety mass media, you are led to believe that, let me put this on the slide. You're led to believe that crime is rampant, that it's rising everywhere, that we all need to be very, very afraid. Well, the fact is that nothing could be further from the truth generally, and specifically in Virginia, we have the 4th lowest violent crime rate in the country. And our violent crime rate and our property crime rate have been falling since the early 1990s. So that's the backdrop against which I want to make this presentation. And just a couple slides to belabor that point. This is national data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Every year they do a crime victimization survey, and this is the truest reflection on crime in America. Serious property crime, serious violent crime, and total serious crime has dropped by more than half since 1994, which I think is important for people to understand in the context of what's happening in American jails and prisons. This is a look at Virginia versus the rest of the country. Well below average across the entire spectrum in violent crime, dropping steadily since the early 90s. Same thing holds true for property crime, where the drop has been steeper. And we find that also to be true in our local jurisdictions. So this is, let me describe these 2 jail footprints to you. One of these, ACRJ, is the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail. Its member constituents are Albemarle County, Nelson County, and the city of Charlottesville. Crime down. The only thing that was up are what are called crimes against society, which are drug crimes, weapons crimes, some internet sex offenses. And we see that precisely is the same pattern for the Central Virginia Regional Jail which has membership of Greene, Madison, Orange, Louisa, and Fluvanna. So the difference between these two jails is largely one of demographics. Charlottesville and Albemarle more of a highly dense urban and then suburban ring. And then, of course, adding Nelson County to that as a very rural area. But CVRJ is rural across the board. There's no city in that entire footprint. There are towns. There's no significant population density in any of the 5 counties that make up CVRJ. The one thing that has been going up in both jurisdictions, and more sharply in the rural areas than in the more urbanized areas, are drugs and narcotics violations. And that's probably no surprise to our next speaker, Dorothy. Drug and narcotics violations up 61% over the last decade in CVRJ member jurisdictions. And this is Virginia State Police data. We can also look to the Virginia Department of Forensic Science for data, and DFS conducts certifications of drugs seized everywhere in the Commonwealth of Virginia for its use in prosecution. And you can see that drug seizures, and this dates all the way back from 2001, are up 72% in the ACRJ footprint and up a whopping 333% in CVRJ's footprint. The other nice thing, well, not nice, but interesting thing that DFS data does that jail data or arrest data does not, is it allows us to look at the types of drugs and the patterns in the types of drugs by jurisdiction, and I have that data if anybody's interested in it. This is by jail footprint, and it can be misleading because what we see right here in 2018, the very last year of data I have, methamphetamine was the #1 drug seized in Albemarle County, and the #1 drug seized in Nelson County. It is almost, not, I won't say it's non-existent in Charlottesville, but it's not prevalent. Cocaine is still the most prevalent drug in the city of Charlottesville. You can also see this upswing in opioid abuse, specifically over the last 5, 6, 7 years. What's interesting is geography matters when it comes to drug of choice. When we move to CVRJ's footprint, you can see that opioids got to start earlier and climb steeper, and is now the most prevalent drug of abuse in the 5 rural jurisdictions that encompass the Central Virginia Regional Jail footprint. Also, we see a little bit of spike of methamphetamine. We also see very, very late in the game the emergence of fentanyl, which is a very disturbing prospect given how high the fatality rate is for fentanyl overdose. So all of these suggest that there is an impact that increases in drug prevalence and drug arrests are having on our regional jails. So I want to talk about what's in this regional jail data, and I want to talk about it specifically as it pertains to women, because there are some very uncomfortable truths about women in the jail population that have not been widely discussed, and I think they need to be. The first thing that strikes my eye when I see the regional jail data, and this is both jails, is that we should be seeing, as a result of this, and as a result of that, and as a result of that and that, we should be seeing the population at the regional jails going down. There's less violent crime, there's less property crime, and there isn't enough drug crime, it appears, to be able to move the needle. But in fact, booking volume's up in both jails. And a booking is a charge, not a person. So I want to make that distinction. I can get booked into the jail on, if I get booked in on breaking and entering and grand larceny, that's 2 bookings. 1 intake, but 2 bookings. So one of the reasons the booking volume is up is because the number of charges per intake is rising. People are getting arrested on more offenses at the same time. This is particularly true at CVRJ, but it's true for both jails. When we look at this phenomenon by gender, you can see that it is disproportionate. Women's bookings up 41% at ACRJ, men's up 17. Women's bookings up 31% at CVRJ, men's booking up 5%. And I don't want your eye to be drawn to these trend lines in an inappropriate way. One of the reasons you would think, well, this looks like it's growing more than this does, but you have to appreciate where you're starting at and where you're ending. So if the number's super low, it doesn't take a significant increase to get a higher percentage of increase than if the number starts out high. I guess that's the best way to describe it. One of the things I'm really interested in, and I haven't done this, I haven't separated this by gender, but when I look at both jails and what's feeding these jails at the front door, they're vastly dissimilar depending on whether they are they have an urban core and a suburban ring around the core, or whether it's countryside all the way. You can see that the most prevalent charges are DUI and alcohol at ACRJ, but they are larceny and felony probation violations. I want you to see this graph. More on this later. Also felony narcotics, more on that later. Here's narcotics in Albemarle, Charlottesville Regional Jail. So up and really up, and then up here as well. You can also look at what's feeding the jail by charge level, felonies versus misdemeanors. And you can see the interesting difference when you talk about the number of cars out on the road. Far more people are arrested in ACRJ's footprint than CVRJ's footprint on traffic. Far more in the outlying counties are arrested on property crimes than in the urban core and surrounding suburban area. But again, I want to draw your attention to felony probation violations up, and up. Same thing with drug offenses. Felony drug up, felony drug up. So let's zoom in on those from a gender perspective. The difference between men's and women's booking rates for felony drug offenses is substantial. At CVRJ, double the booking rate for women than men over the last 10 years. And more than 3, approaching 4 times the rate for women than from men at ACRJ. And then we look at felony probation violations. Not a huge difference at ACRJ, but an enormous difference between men and women at CVRJ, and they're both up substantially, women up almost 5-fold. We have to start asking our questions. What is it about felony probation violations that we are seeing so much a more significant an upswing in bookings for these violations than we did 10 years ago in both jail footprints? And why specifically in CVRJ's footprint are we seeing such an extreme rise in what is oftentimes not linked to new offenses? It's linked to what are called technical violations of probation, which are not violations of law, but violations of the rules of probation. Positive drug tests, failing to report, failing to comply with the court's orders. So now let's take a look at intakes. Intakes are people being booked into the jail. So if I get booked in on B&E and grand larceny,
It's 2 bookings, but it's a single intake. Bookings are up less, or intakes are up less steeply at ACRJ and are actually falling at CVRJ fairly substantially. And when we look at intakes by gender, we see almost entirely the increase in intake volume at ACRJ rising is because of women. And it's interesting at CVRJ that the only reason that their intakes are down is because of men. The women's rate has remained virtually rock solid stable across the entire 10-year period. But in any event, they both produce the same thing, which is more women getting booked in on more charges than men as a function of time. We can also look at jails not just in terms of how they get loaded in on the front end, but we also want to look at how they are emptying on the back end. And what we're seeing are differences between the two jails. The average length of stay at ACRJ has dropped 23% over the last 9 years and has increased 28% at CVRJ over the last 8 years. I don't have an explanation for that. It needs further investigation. But when we look at that by gender, we find that women, the drops in length of stay among women at ACRJ are shallower than men, but not by a whole lot. But when we look at the rise in average length of stay among women at CVRJ, it's substantially higher than the rise in the men's average length of stay. Of course, men are still serving longer jail sentences than women are. Some of this is a function of the kinds of crimes that the different genders are brought in. Another way to look at jails is in terms of the actual bed days expended. So think of a jail as just a really, just from a standpoint of counting people in beds, it's not that different from a hospital or a hotel for that matter. There is an occupancy rate. And every bed costs, on average, somewhere around $93 a day. So you can actually monetize these bed days, and changes in the bed day expenditures to actually equate to dollars and cents per citizen of a given jurisdiction. And you'll notice that ACR bed days expenditures are down, and for the first time are actually lower than CVRJ's bed day expenditures, even though they have about another quarter to a third more people in the ACRJ footprint than the CVRJ footprint. When we look at bed day expenditures by gender, we see two things happening that are on the surface different, but they're really very similar. At ACRJ, men's bed days expenditures are down, but women's are up. What this means is, over the last 10 years, the percentage of the daily population in the jail has become increasingly female. And the same thing is true at CVRJ, because the women's bed day expenditures are rising much higher than the men's expenditures, which are almost flat. So either way, you end up with more women in the jail as a function of its total daily population over the course of this 10-year period. And I was talking with ACRJ's superintendent, Martin Coomer, not too long ago. They're approaching 20% female bed day expenditure at the jail. Used to be 10, used to be 12. So I think it's fair to ask why. And when we look at how bed days are expended, a third of the bed days at both jails can be attributed to felony probation violations. So if we are interested in understanding why women specifically are an increasing share of the daily population of the jail, I think that's a good place to start looking, as is drug felonies. Same thing's true at CVRJ. Here's a piece of work that I still need to do. I have studied the return to custody rates for ACRJ and CVRJ without regard to gender. I think it's time to redo this study to be able to understand whether return to custody rates differ by gender. We do know that somewhere around 25% of inmates return in the following year after their release. And we know that that's increasing, that rate is increasing at both jails. We also know that the 2-year return to custody rate is above 35% at ACRJ and about 33% at CVRJ, and also rising in both jails. I need to put in the work now to understand whether this is differentially impacting men and women. Because one of the reasons that jails stay full is the same people keep coming back again and again and again and again, whether it's because of a new charge or whether it's because of a violation of probation. Okay, a couple more things. I've been involved in a study with the University of Virginia over the last 5 years. It's been really one of the highlights of my professional life. Been working with 2 professors from the systems engineering program and a professor from the Data Science Institute. And every year we're given a fresh group of 4th-year systems engineering majors to conduct their capstone project. And they know a whole lot about data that I will never even try to know. I know a whole lot about criminal justice that I need to teach them every year. But after doing that, we have been able, using a design protocol that the the Institute of Law, Psychiatry, and Public Policy helped us design. We were able to apply for and have approval of a UVA Institutional Review Board protocol that allowed us to match data between the jail and our local community service board, Region 10. First time that's ever happened. Well, you can imagine the kind of learning that springs when you are allowed to match name and date of birth between these 2 data sets. And our learning over the last 5 years has led us to a significant understanding of the preponderance of mental illness in our jails. And at ACRJ, that preponderance is 28% of those who are screened. So roughly 1 in 4 inmates who are being held long enough to screen, which is somewhere around 24 hours or so, are meeting those minimum screening criteria. I'm not suggesting they all have serious mental health issues, but the screener is designed to alert mental health professionals that they need additional evaluation. And what's important for the standpoint of this group is that women screen in at a much higher rate than men did at the jail. We also know now that if we look at whether an individual had first contact with Region 10 or first contact with the jail about 70% of the time, they are known to the jail before they're known to Region 10. So we appreciate the fact that for all of its for all of the awful things that incarceration is, we now have some data that would suggest that incarceration with meaningful screening and meaningful follow-up does identify individuals who are appropriate for treatment and does successfully link approximately 66% of those individuals to treatment once they're released from jail. And we're currently using almost a little over $250,000 of funding from the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation to improve that linkage strategy. We also created a therapeutic docket using this data, which is now a vibrant part of our court system. Another thing that I think it's important to understand is when we think about all these little counties, all of these, like Madison County has like 13,000, 12,000 people in it. Nelson County has 14,000 people in it. How do we best serve individuals who are released from a jail setting into a rural community where proximity to mental health treatment is more difficult given the limitations in public transportation access and what have you. One of the things that was really interesting in this year's study is we took the jail's risk needs assessment called Compass, and we matched the items in the Compass to the screening results from the mental health screener. And we determined that inmates who associated their current legal trouble with drugs and alcohol were 50% more likely to screen in. Again, no surprise to anyone who's worked with this population, but we never had data on it before. What we also found is that struggling to pay your bills is a 59% higher screen-in rate. Not having a permanent address, a 68% higher screening in rate, and those who had been in the local area for less than 6 months were 36% more likely to screen in, which led us to a discussion with the Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition for the Homeless. They provided us with their database to match with Region 10's database and to match with the jail's database. And much to our surprise, we found that the popularly held notion that homelessness and crime were inextricably linked is largely discredited by the data. Those who are homeless, only 15% of those were in the ACRJ database over 48 months of study. So somewhere a little less than 4% a year. And I think the general public is booked in at about 2.8%. So higher, but not significantly higher. What's important though, is that if you are booked in and you're cross-matched to the homeless database, you are 43% likely to meet the screening criteria for serious mental illness, which is significantly higher than the general population. And lastly, I don't think I could leave you without at least just a tiny little peek into what's going on right this very minute. I was asked by probably 5 or 6 members of the criminal justice system to say, Neil, can you find out what's happening as a result of COVID? I went to the jail and they gave me data for the first 6 months of 2020, and I unpacked it, and sure enough, the average daily population at our jail, which we have been trying to drop by, I don't know, 10% for the last 10 years, dropped 27% in 6 months because of a pandemic. It's also true with CVRJ, down 16%. Statewide, down 21%. And it's down across the board. Here's some of the data. Everybody down. The only one that's up is federal inmates at ACRJ, but they went from 8 to 12, so I wouldn't get too excited about that one blue bar that's above the 0 line. This is what it looks like in terms of intakes. Bottoming out in April, barely rising in May, starting to rebound a little bit in June. And by the way, here's the average for the preceding 4 years. So we were a little bit below average to start in January. Both felonies and misdemeanors dropping. The difference is felonies dropped and stayed down. Misdemeanors dropped and then started to climb back up again. Now I need to see another 6 months worth of data before I consider that to be a true pattern. That could simply be noise in the data month to month. This is men and women. You can see in April, bottomed out for women, and then they started to climb back up a little bit. Men bottomed out and stayed a little bit more stable. But the impact has been among both genders. And you can see that everything's down. Violent, property, drug, alcohol, traffic, sex offense, weapons, contempt, probation violations, everything is down. So, here are the conclusions that I would like to leave you with. We are safer, far safer than when we were a decade ago. We are fundamentally safer than we were in 1993. Yet the public doesn't really appreciate that. Unfortunately, that safety dividend has not found its way into our jail populations until the last 3 months, which I don't attribute to anything other than a pandemic. Women are taking up a greater percentage of jail bed days than they used to, and that's true in both jails. And this is predominantly a result of felony drug charges and felony probations or other drug-motivated crimes such as property. And that women in jails are significantly more likely to meet the screening criteria for serious mental illness. And finally, that we only know what we know about COVID. We do know that when we include the number of people that have been put on home electronic incarceration at the jail, that the actual number of people who are in the jail today is 40% below where it was this time last year. Think about that for a second. So the question is, what happens next? What happens to all those people that either didn't go or we let out? We'll be able to follow them and see if they return to custody at any greater rate than in previous years. And my question is, what if we find out that we don't experience any increase in crime, that we don't experience any increase in violations of probation? What if we determine that reducing the jail by 40% of its average daily population has no adverse impact on public safety? If we can prove that, then I think we have a pretty strong argument to increase our investments in alternatives and to keep doing the kinds of things that we're doing right now. And that's it. I'm open for any questions.
I hope you'll stick around for questions after that. Yeah.
Lisa's got her hand up. Unmute.
Thank you. I'm interested in the linkage between the women who are assessed or screened for the criteria for mental illness. Is anything being done in the court system to, instead of putting them in jail right away, if they come up as a reoffender and they've already shown signs of mental illness, would they first be sent to your local mental health system agency or Western state to be evaluated?
That all depends. It depends on what the call for service was about. We do have a very healthy crisis intervention team established in both Charlottesville and Albemarle County. If an individual is suffering symptoms of mental illness and the officer, in his judgment, deems the person to be better suited for a medical environment than a legal one, they can take them to UVA Hospital and hand them off to a team at the emergency room that can do a thorough evaluation on them. And that happens quite a bit. If you're physically arrested, you are, they have to take you out to the magistrate. And the magistrate has some very strict criteria on who they can release and who they must detain. And those are established statewide. I am happy to say that we do have an option for misdemeanors and those who commit fairly low felony offenses that can be reduced to a misdemeanor. It's called the Charlottesville Albemarle Therapeutic Docket. And in the last 2 years, we have created that docket out of thin air, and it's now serving approximately 20 men and women from the local area. But it is a piece of the puzzle. It is not the solution. We need, on an average day, we have over 100 individuals at the jail. Well, pre-COVID, we had over 100 individuals at the jail every day that met the screening criteria. And we just simply do not have enough alternatives for all those folks.
There's a question from Audrey Dannenberg. And her question is, do you think the incarceration of women has anything to do with them being responsible for caring for their children, not just mental illness, more so than men?
I don't have data on it, but I can tell you that over the course of my career as a probation officer, I met numerous women who were experiencing extreme financial stress, psychological stress. They were trying desperately to hang on to their kids. Many of them came from traumatized backgrounds themselves. So I think it's a very complicated equation when you start to look at the reason why women are making up an increasingly sizable portion of the jail population. But there's no doubt in my mind that the stressors that accompany single parent households is it certainly can drive people to do things that they ordinarily would not do.
And there's another question from Kit Murphy McNally. Would it be possible to have mobile psychological drug treatment teams travel to rural areas?
So this is something that has really come into sharper focus in the nationwide discussion about policing. Most police officers will be the first ones to tell you they've gotten a week worth of training in dealing with mental illness. And they are going on these service calls trying to make decisions that are, in an ideal world, are better left to mental health professionals. So I envision a day, I don't know when it's going to come, but I envision a day when we actually invest
in improving our ability to thoughtfully and professionally intervene in crisis situations wherever they are, whether they're in downtown Charlottesville or whether they're in Bumpus. The problem as it exists in these rural communities is that they are so resource poor for the most part, that it is really, really difficult over a huge geographical area that is not well populated to provide the level of coverage that is needed to truly effectively intervene in some of these crisis situations.
And then Rick Wagner asks, is this a national trend?
Yes, the women are an increasingly sizable percentage of the Virginia Department of Corrections population. They are an increasingly sizable percentage of the national corrections population. So we are seeing we're seeing this in a lot of different places, and the literature has been building on this for probably a decade.
It's Bryce Wagner, I'm sorry, not Rich. Okay, I think those are all the questions.
Great. I'd like to hear what Dorothy has to say. And just as an introduction to Dorothy, Dorothy and I are well acquainted. I served on her board at Georgia's Healing House for a couple of years. We have both been in a position to appreciate the size of the need in the women's correction population, particularly those who are addicted to narcotics and recently opiates and just in the last year or two, methamphetamine. So I'm very interested in hearing from her in terms of what has been crafted in Charlottesville to address those needs.
Mr. Goodloe, I would like to thank you very much. That was an amazing presentation, and I'm really awed by all that information, and I bless you for pulling it all together, and thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce.
Can I say one thing before you go?
Oh, please.
This fall, I will be preparing annual reports for every jurisdiction that I serve. And those jurisdictional reports will have data specific to the jurisdiction. So if you live in Albemarle County, it'll be Albemarle County data. Wasn't able to go into that kind of detail today. There will be two broader reports that are for each of the jail footprints, and then there will be a comprehensive report for all of Central Virginia. But I want you to be on the lookout because your Board of Supervisors will be in a position to actually read the report, hopefully be able to make some sense of it, and then have a public discussion about what's going on in our criminal justice.
Wow, that's a very, very good heads up. Thank you for that. We'll watch for that with both our city and our county boards to further explore this. Thank you. Thank you very much, Neil.
You're welcome.
Dorothy Tompkins is here with me at my home. And Dorothy is a retired pediatric cardiologist from UVA, and she's also trained in addiction medicine. That's the least of what's on her resume. Bless her, she's a league member, and she's a women's justice reform champion extraordinary. And she opened the nonprofit Healing House. Georgia's, it's called George's house in 2016. And in July, she was recognized by the Seville law firm Allen & Allen as one of its hometown heroes. Dorothy believes that if someone is willing to turn their life around, then they should be given the opportunity. And she gave women in need of structured recovery from alcohol and drug addictions in Charlottesville that very opportunity when she founded George's House. And I'm going to let Dorothy take it from there. And Dorothy, you let me know when you want me to play that video and we can put it up.
Okay.
Dorothy.
Hi, thanks for all of your interest in this. We founded George's Friends actually in 2008, and it was following the death of a very talented, wonderful woman of our community who died in ACRJ. She committed suicide after being arrested for being drunk in public. She'd had multiple arrests for nonviolent offenses related to her alcoholism. And we felt that if she'd had a recovery house, which would give her support in working on her recovery from alcoholism, that perhaps this would not have happened. And so she was actually kind of the catalyst for forming George's Friends, because a number of us were quite aware of the problems that the addiction to drug and alcohol causes in people's lives and in their families. I had been volunteering at ACRJ in a substance abuse program, and I realized that that a lot of the women who were incarcerated there, their offenses had to do with their addictions to alcohol and drugs, and they were nonviolent offenses. They weren't all simply possession or being drunk, but some of them were writing bad checks so they could get their drugs or alcohol and so forth. But their underlying problem was their addiction. And also had done some volunteer work at Region 10 and saw women there who were struggling to get into recovery, but they had no safe place to live. They really didn't have any choice about where they were living, but they would often be in a situation with an abusive significant other. Often the person that they were living with was addicted themselves. And so they were really struggling to work on their own recovery. And there were a number of us that realized the depth of this problem, and we started George's Friends. And it took us a while to get completely organized with and to get a 501c3 and to find a house, because originally we couldn't find a house that was zoned for this type of facility. But in 2015, we found a house. It was actually in the county, but it's down in the Woollen Mills area. And we opened George's House. And I have a little video that I want to show in just a minute, but I want to give a little bit more background. We look upon addiction as a disease, not a crime. And that addiction leads to criminal behavior sometimes, but in itself, addiction in this country, unfortunately, is treated as a crime itself. Whereas in the medical field, we feel that it's actually a disease that hijacks the brain, more or less. And to recover from addiction or to get into recovery from addiction requires a lot of work and a lot of support. I was just attending a National Association for Recovery Residences seminar, and they identified some of the things that are risk factors that Neil was just touching on as far as people being released from incarceration. And the risk factors that they were looking at led to either recidivism, relapse, or overdosing, or even suicide. And the risk factors that they identified were, first, lack of recovery, a lack of recovery plan, and a lack of support, which I've already alluded to as far as George's House, a lack of treatment, and Neil has referenced that. They did identify lack of housing as being a risk factor. Lack of employment was a significant risk factor, and the lack of attention to mental health and physical problems was a significant factor. Now, we address all of these factors at George's house. The women are drug tested to make sure that they remain clean from drugs and alcohol. The women are required to go to outpatient treatment for substance abuse. They're required to get a therapist, and and we help them to find employment. They virtually all are able to find employment, and we make sure that they get their mental health problems as well as their physical problems addressed. In addition to the significant mental health problems that Neil was referring to, almost all women with addiction, and I'm including alcohol as an addiction, almost all of them have a significant problem with anxiety. So they, and a lot of them have PTSD, and quite a significant proportion have a problem with depression. So we make sure that all of these things are addressed at George's house. So let's look at a little short video that we have.
Hello, and thank you for your interest in George's Friends. I'm happy to welcome you to George's house, to introduce you to the women who are in our program, and to hear their stories about their remarkable journeys of recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. We benefit from donations and contributions of so many supporters throughout the community. So come, join us for this virtual tour. I'm also happy to introduce you to George's Cottage. We have wonderful meetings here, workshops and classes that are not only available to women in the house, but are open to our alumni and others in the community. I'm also happy to introduce you to our beautiful grounds where the women can enjoy time outside. We have raised beds and wonderful spaces to sit outside.
When I came to George's house, I was lost, working on getting my kid back, getting my life straight, my license. They offered a parenting class here. I completed that, so I took that to court with me today. I have multiple certificates. I finished 16 weeks of IOP, which was 16 weeks of intensive outpatient therapy. But I completed that, even being on Zoom. Although it was a struggle, I didn't want to do any of it. But now that I look back on it, I'm glad that I had somebody to push me. I wouldn't have got that where I lived. They have been a real support system for me. I can go to staff about anything. I've made some great friends along the way. It's helped me keep my sobriety. It's gave me tools for when I leave here. It's just a good place overall. It's great. It's been really good. It's a beautiful house, great staff, great ladies.
My life has changed because of this place a whole lot. And they get us in programs. They do stuff with us, and we eat good. Oh my God, I gained so much weight. I gained about 20 pounds. It's not a good thing, but I'm happy. I'm happy again for a long. It's been a long time since I've been happy. I'm not lazy anymore. I want to work. I want to do stuff. And they push you to do this. It gets hard sometimes, but everybody loves me now. I feel like I'm loved, and I'm loved here. I can't do this. I'm sorry.
I'm coming from my home in which I'm leaving a relationship that wasn't healthy for me. And it took me a while to become healthy enough to make that decision. I've been trying for several years to get sober, and this has been going really well, just allowing me to focus on myself and becoming a better person in my recovery. The women in the house have offered a great deal of support, and it's nice to live with people who have gone through, similar things. We can just sit down and talk. Last week we had a program on mindful meditation. We had a program on art therapy. We had a program on relationships and what are some components of healthy relationships. And the program itself is really good. It provides drug testing, which is great. Like I know, I'm gonna be checked up on, and it just offers another level of security to keep me sober.
George's House is a safe haven for all of our residents.
A number of us who were in the treatment field for addiction realized that there was no recovery home for women in the area. A very wonderful lady named Georgia committed suicide in jail after numerous arrests for being drunk in public. We felt that if she'd had a supportive recovery house, that perhaps her death would not have occurred. Recovery from addiction is harder than medical school. It requires 24 hours a day work in order to make the changes in life that people need to make. And we've been able to help these women with that kind of support.
I have had to lose just, a lot of components in my life and just rebuild from scratch. And this was a great place to come to do that.
Okay, so a big part of recovery is learning how to live and how to maintain good relationships, not only in your family, but in your community. And one of the things about George's House is that the women there are all expected to be accountable, to take responsibility for the house, to take responsibility not only for their own recovery, but for being an assistant to the, if you will, the recovery of the women that they're living with. So it's like a big family. And their ups and downs, of course, their disagreements, but they learn how to deal with these disagreements because that's a part of life. So we're very grateful for the support of our community for George's House. And I'll open it now for questions.
There is one from Sue Lewis. How does George's House fit into the treatment and housing that was pushed by Impact in the last couple of years?
We really didn't have any relationship with the Impact program itself. I am familiar with it, but we incorporated in, I think, 2008, and we got our own 501c3, so we were a separate endeavor. We're supported by donors and some by grants, but the primary support for the house comes from individual and group donations. I don't know if that answers the question.
Want me to take?
And,
okay, we have one from Rice Wagner. What is the recidivism rate?
Well, recidivism is referring to people going back to jail, and so I really didn't have a chance to go into a lot of detail about our program, but we asked women to make a commitment to stay at least 6 months. They may stay up to 2 years because recovery is hard work and it takes time. And during that period of time, of course, they are drug tested. We've not had anybody go back to jail who's living in the house. now we have had some relapses, but for people that actually complete the program, from the data that we have, they are continuing to do quite well in the community. Now, follow-up of people who've completed any kind of treatment is somewhat difficult because of privacy issues and also, to be quite blunt about it, honesty issues. If you were to contact somebody who had been, and I worked in the treatment field before, if you contact somebody who has been through treatment and ask them how they're doing, they're invariably going to say they're doing fine. You know, I mean, if they've relapsed, they're not going to be truthful about it. So long-term data is on recovery and so forth is difficult to get. We are fortunate that the women get jobs in our community, and so they tend to stay in the community. And we know from the women that have kept in touch that they have done quite well. And it's been pretty amazing how many of them have kept in touch. And we're very grateful for that. You saw on the video, you saw the little thing about the Georgia's Cottage. We have started some 12-step programs there, as well as educational programs there to include the alumni. And of course, the COVID-19 thing kind of threw us all for a bit of a loop there, because we couldn't do a lot of the hands-on kinds of programs that we wanted to do. But we are continuing to reach out to the alumni and to other women in recovery in the community.
We have a question from Audrey Dannenberg. Where is George's house located? Or is that a kept secret, like the safe house for abused women who leave?
No, it's at 405 Ridge Street, and it's extremely handy. The women can walk to Region 10. They can walk to many of their jobs actually from the house. So it's very convenient. It's right downtown, and there's a bus stop right in front. So if they're too far a walk, they can hop on the bus.
And Kit Murphy asked, McNally asked, how are women referred? Are there court referrals?
They're not actual court referrals, but some of the public defenders and lawyers get in touch with us. Now, one of the women that you saw on the video, I did go to court when she had a hearing and told the judge what George's house is about. And she was released on the condition that she go to George's house. So, but the court itself didn't refer her. It was through the lawyer. But the referrals come from people we actually haven't done any advertising because our referrals come from local treatment programs, our community service board, therapists, and other people familiar, and other social agencies familiar with what we are doing.
Okay. And Rice Wagner has another question. How have you dealt with COVID?
How we dealt with COVID? Yes. We asked the women to be very careful about all of the precautions that are recommended, such as wearing masks. Most of them are working, and so when they come home, we ask them to take off their shoes and change their clothing and take a shower when they come home. We've not had any incidents of COVID in the house, which is very interesting. We are certified by the Virginia Association of Recovery Residences, and therefore an affiliate of the National Association of Recovery Residences. And the incidence in recovery houses has been, across the country, has been pretty low, which is pretty surprising to me. But I think everybody is very cognizant of the fact that, they're responsible not only for their own behavior, but for, how they treat the people around them.
Maybe your training that is, being so conscious of doing the right thing all the time that just goes to show what happened.
We do have one bedroom that we've set aside so that if somebody, does become infected, that they could be in that bedroom, and we use that bedroom also for new admissions. We ask them to be quarantined for the first 2 weeks when they're there. So that that's a precaution that we take.
See, I don't think we have any more, do we, Maggie?
Nope, I don't see any, but great questions.
So did I have any more questions?
For those of you who have not seen a house, it is magnificent. It is just amazing inside and out.
It really is beautiful.
I'll just put in a little plug also for the fact that, it's a nice place to live, which helps the women to gain self-respect. When women are in the throes of their addiction, their self-esteem is, as I put it, under the rug. And they feel a huge amount of guilt and shame. And being treated with respect by the staff and by the volunteers, and as well as by the other women in the house, is a big part of their recovery.
One last question from Rice. Can we visit?
Yes, we ask that you call ahead of time, particularly with the COVID-19 thing going on. But somebody, one of the staff people can give you a little tour.
How many people live there?
And Karen Yates, whoops, hold on, the questions are still coming. How many people can live there?
10 is the best number. We can have 11. I mean, and actually we could have 12, but it's too crowded when there are 12 people there. The only reason we would ever have that many is if we know somebody's getting ready to leave and there's an admission that is rather urgent because they don't have any other place to go or something like that. But 10 is the best number.
Jerry, do you see any more questions? There's one more.
Do you have a wait list, it says?
We do at times. We don't right now, which is interesting with with the decrease in the number of people incarcerated. Also, there's been a decrease in the number of people in treatment. So we get, ordinarily we get people referred who are in treatment, but because of the COVID-19, pandemic that's going on, most treatment centers either closed when the pandemic started, or they became virtual, or they had to vastly reduce the number of people they had in treatment. So our referrals, it's very interesting. Our referrals dropped off when COVID-19 started, but and again, like with the population in the jail, that has occurred in other recovery houses as well. It was kind of perplexing to figure out exactly what was going on.
I think is that it?
That's all I see.
We chose this topic today, justice reform for women, because we thought it was very fitting in the face of all that's going on this summer with just calls for justice reform and Black Lives Matter. And George's House is something concrete and significant as an alternative measure to incarceration. And that's, I think, what the big objective of a lot of the people who are out there.
Yeah, I had something on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that Neil was talking about was probation violation. Well, a lot of our women are on probation, and we require that they sign a release so that we can talk to their probation officer. And we've not had any probation violations in our 5 years of being open.
So, well, we have run over, and I thank you all for being here today. And I thank our guest speakers, Neil Goodlow and Dorothy Tompkins, Dr. Dorothy Tompkins, for a very interesting, informative hour or 2 hours. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Really, really excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
That kid. Can't I see?